There are quite a few chairs that you can occupy here. The closer you are to the speakers, the better. I'd like to begin with thanking the sponsors, our generous sponsors, starting with Z, the title partner, and the author signing area as well, which is a part of the Z's kiosk at the front lawn. Nexa, the associate partner and the venue partner front lawn. Bank of Baroda, venue partner Bethak. Motwani Jadeja Foundation, venue partner Darbar Hall. Rajasthan tourism partner. The JCB Prize for Literature bookstore managed by Full Circle. Aga Khan Foundation, the series partner. Rekit Benkisa, the official cause partner. Diageo, celebration partner. Jen Mikalski, Zomato. The North India Office, US Embassy, New Delhi, the series partner. British Council, session partner. Penguin Random House, Netflix session partner, Etsy session partner, Mahindra World City Jaipur series partner, Public Health Engineering Department session partner, Jayashree Periwal International School, AirAsia travel partner, United Nations India session partner, Avid Learning session partner, Murthy Classical Library of India of Howard University Press session partner, Australian High Commission and Australia Council for the Arts session partner, Paras Buildtech, Sahitya Akademi, both session partners, Save the Children book launch, Center for Policy Research session partner, Citibank, Storytel, CK Birla Hospital, LIC, Sotheby's, SBI, John L. Bissell Foundation, JW Marriott, Airtel, Karma Kettle, Grover Zampa, Coca-Cola, Kingfisher, Good Times Partner. Coming to the media partners, we have Dainik Bhaskar, Rajasthan Patrika, Amar Ujala, Business Standard, Inox, Mathrubhumi, Outlook Magazine, the New Indian Express, and the Tribune. Red FM, the official radio partner, Launchora, the podcast partner, Facebook, our community partner, Be Live, webcast partner, UFO Movies, Cinemedia partner, Gulmohar Lane, Hotel Diggi Palace, Taj Rambagh Palace, Clark Samir, Royal Opera House, Mumbai, The Lalit, Full Circle, Pratham Books, the outreach partner, Yuva Ekta Foundation, Royal Treasure, Event Board, Edelman, Social Connect, McCain, Unibic, Wagh Bakri Tea, Mastkin, Kanha Sweets, and Be Live. We are delighted to introduce our very first session for the day, Live a Little. We request you to kindly turn your phones on silent mode. And please join me in welcoming the award-winning writer and broadcaster, Howard Jacobson, recipient of the Bollinger Everyman Wodehouse Prize, the Man Booker Prize, and many more for his remarkable contributions to the literary world, who's going to be in conversation with eminent writer, essayist, and literary critic, Chandrahas Choudhury, whose books, Days of My China Dragon, Clouds, and Arzee the Dwarf have quickly become everyone's favorites. Ladies and gentlemen, Chandrahas and Howard.
Thank you for a very gracious introduction. Howard, welcome to JLF. We've only met 10 or 15 minutes ago, sir, but
we're already close friends.
That's very good, and I hope then you will allow me the liberty of saying you have a very long face, sir.
A very long face?
Yes. Has no one ever told you that before?
Yes. I was told I had a long face when I was born. People stood over my bed and they said, it's a nice-looking boy. He's got a very long face. And it's a sign of being unhappy and melancholy. And people also said, well, he'll probably be a writer. And
it all came out to be true.
I'm very surprised that you're a good writer when you have such a round face.
I try my best to stretch it. You know, you go to England sometimes and people are so serious and they never smile and like elongate the chins a little bit. But I end up smiling too much. That's my main failing, I feel.
It's a bad habit. Smiling is a bad habit, actually.
Okay. I was thinking to myself, let's not waste any time on small talk because there's so much to talk about. But in a way, it's good. And let's get straight into your new book, Live a Little, which, if I'm right, it's the final book of a very productive decade for you. 2010 was when you won the Booker for the Finkler Question, and you've written several books since. But isn't it the first time you have a protagonist who's a woman? In a way?
No, I've always had women.
I know, in your books, but...
I've always had women in my books.
Yes.
And they're always quite strong-minded, sarcastic women. I like writing about women being sarcastic about men. I don't know why, I kind of quite like that. I've listened to a lot of women be sarcastic about men, particularly sarcastic about me. And I try to be generous about that and to admire it. But this time I have a woman who's more sarcastic than... I think she's probably the most sarcastic woman in literature, actually. Can I say that? She's more sarcastic than Cleopatra, maybe. She and Cleopatra, but there's also a touch of Lady Macbeth about her, too.
I felt when I was reading the book that what I enjoyed very much about it was there was a kind of competitive energy between writer and character.
Yeah, but she wins.
Which is in a way is very generous of you.
Well, I mean, really, you need to lose. You do need to lose to your... You know this.
Yes.
Every novelist will tell you that you must not be smarter than your characters. Once you're smarter than your characters, the novel's finished. And the stronger, the more independent your characters can be of you, the better the book's likely to be. But this woman is infinitely more independent of me than anybody I've ever written before. That's partly because she's not young. She's actually 90. And it's a love story, but now I won't spoil it. But she's a 90-year-old woman. And partly because I'm not 90 yet myself, but I'm on the road that leads to 90. And I admire older people more and more. I admire people my age and people older and people old. We're living through a very interesting period in which we're not only living longer, but if health allows, we're living more intelligently. The most intelligent people I know are in their 90s. My best friend in England will be 101 in a few months' time. He's fully alive, physically not well. That's part of it. If you can allow your body to decay, you can concentrate on your mind. And that's what my characters do, and that's what this woman does, particularly Beryl. She's just wonderfully, wonderfully intelligent. And part of her intelligence is her utter sarcasm. She's absolutely unafraid of anything. And we live, you know, we writers, we live in times in which we are frightened. We're frightened to say things. We have to be careful all the time. We mustn't offend people of gender. We mustn't offend people of a different race. Everything we say, we have to watch. And what's wonderful about Beryl is she just doesn't care. She can say anything. So she licenses me to say anything I want. And I now realize, I said this to my wife as I was finishing, I said, do you know, inside me there is a 90-year-old woman. There has always been a 90-year-old woman. Hence that long face. I said to my wife, is it possible that inside the body of this young god has been a 90-year-old woman? And she said, on several accounts, no, that's not right. But that's how it feels. I feel that this woman just came out of some part of me that I don't recognize, couldn't control, and so she's wonderful, I love her, and I only ever want her. I make a promise to you now. Here in Jaipur, you've heard it first, I will never again write about anybody who isn't a woman and who isn't at least 90. That's it.
Well, the way you put it, it seems as if the old are the youth of the future. And I read somewhere that the largest growing population segment in England, statistically, are centenarians. There's ever more people, more than 100, than there are of other ages.
Yes, soon there will be no young people left in England, which is a good thing in many ways because the old are much more interesting than the young. But anyway, there isn't very much for young people to do in England. England is now just this strange old person's place dreaming of when it was a great power. So it's only a country for old people.
What is wonderful about Beryl is that usually when you see old people in literature, they seem pathetic because they're old and infirm. But as soon as you have someone who embraces that so gleefully as she does, and takes it and is utterly unembarrassed about it, then suddenly there's a great poise and pleasure in listening to her thoughts, isn't it?
Yes, I mean we do. Literature has been very bad about the old. They either, if they're in the theatre, there's some old person sitting in a corner of a stage asleep, or they're a problem. They're a problem for their children, or there's someone that their children is waiting for to die. They've not really been written about often, and it's a great shame because they are wonderful to write about, and particularly when you want to write about them in love. This is a love story, because she falls in love with a man of 90 who she meets in a cemetery, but that's not meant to be significant. They just happen. They meet in a cemetery, which is where you spend a lot of your time when you're 90, and they meet there and they fall in love, and it's love without the physical stuff, which I think is wonderful to write about, because you can just write about the way people fall in love through conversation. And conversation, eroticism through conversation, is actually much more erotic than eroticism through the body. I'm trying to start a movement in which people don't talk about sex through the body anymore. We just kind of forget the body. The body is overrated. You all know, if you're honest with me, you'll admit that the body is overrated, whether the mind is a wonderful resource, infinitely interesting and exciting resource. And you've not got round to this yet, but you will, but to have two 90-year-olds talking to one another, this was the most exciting thing for me to write, and I'm being serious, just to have them talking and talking and talking. And people who don't like this book, and there aren't many, but there are one or two, go, oh, they talk all the time. The people who like the book saying, isn't it wonderful to hear two people talking.
Speaking to your point, I also think it's worth thinking about. On the one hand, as you say, it's more interesting to have people talk in fiction than to write about sex itself. And writing about sex is itself very hard, isn't it? It's much better to suggest something, and maybe that's why somebody like Jane Austen, in the end, is a more interesting writer in terms of what happens between men and women than someone who just writes about.
I could not agree more. Could not agree more. The minute words and sex don't go together very well. Sex makes words look foolish, and words make sex look absurd, really. And any kind of famous erotic book, there are one or two that work, but Lady Chatterley's Lover doesn't work. It's absurd. The Marquis de Sade is tedious. And I agree with you about Jane Austen. There are moments in Jane Austen in which somebody just... Persuasion, particularly, when a woman who's had to part from a man that she loved and has separated from him, and then they meet again and she thinks he doesn't care for her, and at one moment he helps her out of the carriage. She's stepping out of a carriage, she doesn't see him there, she feels a hand under her elbow helping her out. And that moment of the hand under her elbow is one of the most erotically exciting scenes in all literature. That's all. Just the hand under the elbow, and then she knows that he's there, and she knows that he cares. It's fantastic. So we agree about Jane. Who is the sexiest writer in the English language? Jane Austen. Followed by Henry James.
Okay, one of the things I love very much about novels is you get to understand a person in time, and so each chapter, each scene layers a person ever further. And I'm going to read to you two sentences from an early chapter in Live a Little. We're in the world of Beryl Dusenberry, this nonagerian, and she's struggling against the loss of words in her life. Words fade away, and she's trying to hold on to them. And this is how it goes. To her, a word gone is a day gone. And the more I misplace, the more use I have to make of those I can still lay hands on. And although the content of this is very nice, what I want to put before you is the fact that it begins in the third person, this passage, and shifts without any notice to the first. And I think that sort of vertiginous drop into somebody's head is one of the ways in which literature earns its gold, isn't it?
Yes. Yes, and that's what it's for. That's what we are meant to do. We are meant to be led. There's no point in reading a book to read about yourself. Identity politics and literature do not go together. When people say, oh, it was wonderful, I read this book and I discovered who I am, I say, that's a failed book. You know who you are, read about who you are not. And what the exciting things about writing about somebody like Beryl, for the reader, I hope, who is not Beryl, and for myself, the writer of it, and I'm certainly not Beryl, is the way in which an independent, forceful character will take you away entirely from yourself, take the reader away from himself, herself, and take the writer away too. And she has that power, partly because she's fearless. And as you say, because she's losing words, and we are inclined to believe that the loss of memory is a terrible thing. And of course, after a certain time, it is a terrible thing. Forgetting is a terrible thing. But there are times in the process of forgetting when it's empowering, because you have to find another way of putting it, you have to find other words, you search in other ways. This is the story of she is forgetting and the man she falls in love with cannot forget. He can only remember, and he wishes he could forget, but he can only remember. He does a few things when he's a young boy of which he is ashamed, and he spends the rest of his life being ashamed, and he can't forget. So these two things are balanced, forgetting and remembering. And of the two, remembering is the worst. Not being able to forget things that make you feel terrible and guilty and ashamed and humiliated about yourself, that's terrible.
In living with Beryl for a bit inside this book, we get to live with lots of men whom she had affairs with, and among them, one of the saddest creatures is a novelist.
Yes, he's sad, yes. I also call this novelist Howie, so you can make what you like of that.
Why don't we see what Howie's up to, and it will allow us to see whether it strikes a chord. Maybe I want to know if there's anything similar between him and me, for instance.
Well, let's find out. We should explain that I've not chosen this passage. The passage I wanted to read, we'd both decided would probably be too offensive. I don't know you quite well enough to be able to read something quite as racially inappropriate, and she is a very impolite woman, so I wasn't sure. So you've chosen this. But can I just ask you something?
Please.
What's on that screen?
That's you.
It's very, very disconcerting, because every time I talk to you, you look over there. I think you've completely lost interest.
It's just that the Indians are just like the British. They don't like making eye contact.
What are you telling me, that it's over here too?
Yes.
There's one over here. We're going to spend the whole afternoon with me trying to understand what you're talking about. But anyway, that's why you're looking over there, because it's us on it. Don't you think it's weird? I say something and everybody's looking over there.
Up to you. Yes, please. After such encouragement.
All right, well, we're going to skip Howie.
Yes.
For the moment, we can come back to Howie.
We can.
You know me. Okay, so she has two carers. Beryl, she calls herself the princess. She likes the idea, and she calls herself the Princess Schweppes Sodawasser. And she has two carers. She doesn't really need carers. She has a black carer from Africa and an Eastern European carer from some country that she can't remember, but it's somewhere in Eastern Europe. And the interesting thing there is a world of carers, which I happen to know about in North London. And in this world of carers, a battle rages between the carers from Africa and the carers from Eastern Europe. They don't like one another, so they fight with one another. And Beryl enjoys teasing them both. She doesn't need carers because she's well enough, but occasionally, just to give them something to do, she falls off the chair so that they can run in and lift her up. So in walks Euphoria, who is the carer from Africa. Can't remember whether I need glasses. You carry on watching what's interesting you. Now that, the princess tells Euphoria, suits you very well. Euphoria is coming in a resplendent dress. Now that, the princess tells Euphoria, suits you very well. I'm not sure about its appropriateness for helping me to the bathroom, but you could certainly meet the queen in it. Euphoria practices a curtsy. That's what I bought it for, Mrs. Beryl. And where are you anticipating meeting the queen? Underneath my bed? The princess's sarcasm is lost on Euphoria. No, Mrs. Beryl, in her house. The queen has offered you a job? No, I'm very happy working for you. I'm only going for tea. Having said which, she draws from her floral handbag an official invitation to one of the queen's summer garden parties. Is that from Primark? The princess asks. Do you have Primark here?
Do we?
See how many things you've got to be careful of when you're away from home. Is that from Primark? The princess asks. Euphoria looks with consternation at the invitation. Not that, the princess continues, I mean the bag. Anyway, show me. Euphoria shows the princess her bag. No, not that, the invitation. In her confusion, Euphoria drops the invitation and has difficulty retrieving it. So tight is her skirt. You'd better not drop anything in front of Prince Philip, the princess says. She scrutinizes the invitation from the Lord Chamberlain with a degree of annoyance. She has herself been invited to Buckingham Palace only 4 times, and that, given her venerable age and connections, is a paltry number compared to Euphoria's once, allowing that Euphoria has neither venerable age nor connections. So now explain to me why you've come here wearing the dress you mean to see the Queen in. Are you planning to go there after work? It will be a little late for a garden party. I was hoping for your advice, Mrs. Beryl, Nastia said. Mrs. Beryl, Nastia is the Eastern European carer, says that when it comes to royal protocol, you're the one to ask. Are you telling me that you and the Moldovan trollop sit in my kitchen discussing royal protocol? Euphoria covers her face with the invitation from the Lord Chamberlain. Not all the time, Mrs. Beryl. Nastia, that's the one from Eastern Europe, has been listening into the above conversation from the kitchen. Well, I think you look smart enough to meet Queen, she says, the moment she has a chance to talk to Euphoria on her own. So does Mrs. Beryl. No, Mrs. Beryl patronize you. You are cheap adventure for her eyes. You are package holiday. That's how the English see black people. She said my dress was beautiful. Yes, beautiful for a black person. Well, I am a black person, not in the way you're black person for Mrs. Beryl. I have boyfriend reading book about Western people, looking down on culture of Eastern people by admiring it. Appreciating us is the new form of imperialism. I'm not Eastern. We are all Eastern people to Western people. Well, I'm still wearing this dress for the garden party. Well, you should, but don't let Queen insult you by saying you look nice. You tell her she looked nice first. Do you have a message for her? Nastia thinks about it. Tell her days of cultural appropriation over. And ask her if she has a spare prince I can marry. We now know that she's got lots of spare princes. In order to prove her point about Mrs. Beryl's condescension to the exotic, Nastia turns up to work the following week in Moldovan national dress. Mrs. Beryl is going to be wild about this, she tells Euphoria. How I look, she asks her employer with a twirl. Like shit, the princess says. It's not that rude.
When you write a novel about 2 people falling in love, and on one side there's a character with so much energy and so much rudeness, what do you have to do on the other side to counterbalance it?
Well, it's hard. It's hard because Beryl has all the life and Shimmy has no life. One somehow has to make a kind of a touching spare comedy about his sadness.
Yes.
He is very sad. What's happened? I'll let you into what's happened. I sometimes don't tell people his secret, but I'll tell. When he's a little boy, he dresses up in his mother's underwear. Some little boys do that. Everybody's out of the house. He finds a laundry basket. He dresses up in his mother's underwear, looks at himself in the mirror, and is so appalled by how he looks. Because little boys, in the main, don't look all that great in their mother's underwear. Depends on the underwear, and depends on the little boy. But he is ashamed of himself and never gets over this. When I gave this novel to my publisher said, "Are you telling me that you think this will ruin his life?" I say, yes, it will ruin his life. He will spend the rest of his life being ashamed of himself because it feels it questions him as a man. What kind of a man am I, he will go on thinking, if I wanted to do this as a little boy? What does it say about my masculinity? My publisher said, I don't believe that happens. I spent the whole of my life in my mother's underwear.
There's going to be a lot of Googles for a publisher right after this event.
That's what I said. I said, that's why you're a publisher and I'm a novelist. So you kind of got to make it a kind of tragedy comedy, really. He has the most wonderful bathroom, the most spotless bathroom. He is in a kind of, because it's not just that he did that, he is a rather unnatural person, and he is appalled by the body. He's appalled by his own body. When his mother dies not long after this event, he wonders if it's his fault. He wonders if his invasion of his mother's privacy destroyed something in her. It's a nonsensical thing to feel, but he feels it, and he can't help her. He has a brother who can help her. He can't bear what's happening to her body. He can't bear all the paraphernalia of invalidism and illness, so he withdraws more and more from the body. And you have to there's something preposterous about that, absurd about that, but also touching about that. So you have to make him a kind of quasi-tragic figure, really.
I thought there was something especially successful about this device because it would have been so easy to set up something big in his life. You know, he killed somebody or somebody died on his watch. That would make him feel penitent about the past. But when it's something so small about his childhood, in a way, it's a work of fiction to sort of trace the logic, the reason of human unreason in a way, isn't it?
I very much like doing things I like something big coming from something little.
Yes.
I don't have big themes. I don't like big themes. I always feel you're cheating if you have a big theme. I've just wrote an article that's appeared in The Guardian today about concentration camp novels. I'm not sure people should write concentration camp novels at all, actually. But I could never do one of those things. I feel the minute the minute the theme is big, it's kind of easy. I like make a tragedy out of nothing. Yes. Make something big grow out of almost nothing. And then the power is, whatever is achieved, it's achieved by the writing. It's achieved by the words.
Exactly.
I don't like anything behind the words. There should be nothing behind the words. No big event. Just let the words let the words give a thing significance. You understand that.
And what happens there is that Shimi, because he has never been able to work out how to solve this problem, when there appears in the book a sudden moment of grace, he's taken by surprise by it, and I thought that was one of the most moving passages in the book. And I was wondering, since you didn't take my request for the previous reading, perhaps you could read us a bit about Shimi at the Chinese restaurant.
I don't think I've got a bit. Have you got a bit measured?
Yes. When he was a boy.
I've never read this before. You sure?
Yes, I am.
If you don't like this, blame him. When he was a boy working in his father's restaurant, Raymond Ho told him it was common for a magician or fortune teller to entertain the guests a table at a time. You sure? Let me just talk about it.
If you like, sir. It's just because you said the words do the work by themselves, which is why.
He gets a job working in a Chinese restaurant. When he's a little boy, when he's trying to work out why his life has gone so wrong, what made him try on his mother's underwear, why does he feel the way he does, he tries to find something outside of himself to blame, so he sort of takes to cartomancy, which is a bit like the tarot cards, in which you read other people's fortune and your own in cards, as if something could be predetermined. Has something been predetermined in his life that explains him? So he becomes an expert at cartomancy and goes from table to table, doing cartomancy. The interesting thing about this was, this is based on real life. There's not much in this novel that's based on real life, but my father, who wasn't a magician but wanted to be a magician, and so became an amateur magician. He was a very, very bad magician, actually. But he worked at a Chinese restaurant, going from table to table, doing card tricks. And the first I discovered about this was when I was at a Chinese restaurant with a girlfriend ordering a Chinese meal, and suddenly a voice in my ear, which I recognize, is my father saying, "Say nothing, say nothing." So I said, and the next minute he's sitting at our table doing card tricks. And the girl I'm with thinks he's fantastic. And she said, "What fantastic trick?" And the tricks are terrible. But she thinks they're fantastic tricks. And this made me look at my father in a new light.
Yes.
But I knew the tricks were no good. So I don't know what you want me to read from this.
Well, actually, I will confess the reason I brought it up is because I knew that your father was a magician.
Yeah, I can't. I don't feel like reading. Do you mind?
Yes, absolutely.
That's twice I've rejected passages that you've chosen for me to read.
No problem.
It's not personal.
It's making a kind of thread that is that's a pattern in its own way.
It's there's something touching about working in a Chinese restaurant when you're not Chinese and earning a living doing that. And one of the sad things is, of course, you don't get this kind of thing anymore because people aren't impressed by magic like that. People aren't impressed by card tricks anymore. Not in an age of computerese and things. So Shimmy, apart from anything else, not only is the beginning of his life painful, the end of his life is painful to him too. He's just always humiliated. I know about this. I know about shame and humiliation. It's my subject. I don't want to make an assumption about you and your writing, but I think shame is what makes you a writer. What happens is you feel something happens to you. You're young, you're little, you're probably shy, you're quiet, you're more likely to live in your head than in your body. This is what's going to make a writer, the birth of a writer. A writer is not born on a playing field. A writer is not going to be a good footballer. A writer is not going to be good at any of the physical things in life. He's going to live in here. And therefore anything that puts him off or upsets him will be a double shame to him. And out of that double shame, writing is born, because you learn, and a particular kind of writing is born. Because if you write about the shame that you've experienced, and particularly if you're funny about the shame that you've experienced, you write a little story or a little poem, and you make fun of yourself. If you can make fun of yourself, you then own the experience of your shame. So I learned when I was a little boy to own my shame, to embrace my shame. There's a danger, because you then go looking for shame. You think, I love owning my shame so much, I will find shame. And I was very good at finding shame. I mean, one way of finding shame is actually to be a novelist in a world that really doesn't... I mean, you're all here because you're all readers, but we're a very small percentage of the world. The world is not very interested. The world is not very interested in novel writers. So the minute you think, I'll be a novel writer and the world will love me for it, you're embarking on a career of humiliation and ignominy. And I've succeeded marvelously well in this, in that I've given my whole life to doing something that the world, apart from a few of you here, is not in the slightest bit interested in. I wrote a novel once called The Mighty Walzer, which is about table tennis. I used to play table tennis, the least attractive game on the planet. And I played, and I was very good. I was a very seriously good table tennis player. And I harbored huge ambitions for myself. And I parody these ambitions in my novel, The Mighty Walzer, because the Mighty Walzer, Oliver Walzer, dreams he will be the greatest table tennis player in the world, which he isn't. And as a consequence of that, he will make a vast fortune, which of course you don't make as a table tennis player, and he will win the devotion of beautiful women. He imagines that beautiful women will flock to a table tennis player. Now, there are lots of beautiful women in this room. Put your hand up if you can think of 10 great table tennis players that you'd like. People liked that novel because it was a kind of metaphor for the writer, really. The novel writer and the table tennis player are both doing things that nobody is interested in, apart from you here.
But I think one reason why this, what you're saying is so resonant also is because one, you can also think of the novelist as a kind of magician, or someone who seeks
Yes.
to carry the powers of magic into words. And two, when you look at parents, I think we all think of our parents, in the first instance, we go back to childhood, we always think of themselves as having secret powers. They always seem to know what's right to do, and you don't. And afterwards, there begins a process of slow disenchantment, sometimes on both sides. And I was wondering how your relationship with your father proceeded when you became a man yourself. And in a way, we're always trying to impress our fathers, isn't it? Was it like the same with you?
Yes, my father was very touching about the whole business of books. My father never read a book, ever. My mother read. Neither of my parents was educated, but my mother read books and read poems and read me poems. My father would sometimes walk through the room and see my mother reading me a poem, and it touched him. He liked it. It was some kind of domestic mystery. What was this music? She was making music of words to me, and I was a little boy listening, and I could see him thinking, this is a wonderful thing that I understand nothing of. And when I wrote my first novel, he said, I'm very touched by it. I dedicated it to him and my mother. And he thought I'd had a special copy made that had printed a special dedication to him. He said, it was very nice of you to have, he's still looking at that screen. He said, it's very nice of you to have done this, Howard. I said, no, it's all right, it's in the print. He said, anyway, I'm going to try and read this. He'd never read a book before. And he had it for about 3 months. And finally, I went home, and he said, I'm really, really interested in this. And this is what he said. I said, how far have you got? He said, I've got this far. Howard Jacobson has asserted his right to be identified as the author of this work in accordance with the Copyright. What's the Copyright Act, he says. And then he said, there's an ISBN number. What's that? What's that? So I explained it all to him, and I realized that my father was never going to read a word of not a single word of what I wrote. And the only thing he ever said, when he was dying, he said to me, I'm very proud of you that you've become a writer and all that, but I want you to make me a promise. You aren't going to become a rabbi, are you? And I made him that promise. And I've done my best.
You've kept it.
To keep that promise, yes.
You've said in the past that one of the reasons why you came to novel writing so late, although you always wanted to write novels, is that it took you a long time to find out what the sources of your vitality were. And I think that's a very good phrase, because often one of the problems of studying literature, as you did, is that one feels the pressure of the great writing of the past, and the imitative urge is more powerful at the beginning than the creative one.
Yes. Well, you were a student of, we both studied literature at university, the same university as it happened. And I was taught by a great critic at the time called F.R. Leavis. Somebody will know of him. He was an austere critic. He wrote a famous book called The Great Tradition, which began, the great English novelists are, and there were about 5 of them. And everybody said, that's terribly prescriptive. And I loved that. I loved that. It suited me, the kind of boy I was, and the kind of boy I'd grown up in the north of England, to be, there should only be a few. I didn't like the idea that the world was full of great novelists. I like the idea that there were just a few, and therefore I would be one. I still think that. I still think the great novelists are, there's probably about 5, and 2 of them are sitting on this stage. So I took that very seriously, and still do, and wanted to be one of those, and read them. And then and read them and read them and read them, and read Dickens and George Eliot, and particularly D.H. Lawrence, and I wanted to be them. And then I also wanted to be Dostoevsky and Tolstoy. I actually tried to write, the only novel I ever, what happened was I would write a paragraph and then think, this is rubbish. I never wrote a novel and then tried to get it published. I couldn't write more than a paragraph. Once I wrote 2 pages. And then at the end of the 2 pages, I thought, this is very, very familiar. And I realized I'd written the first 2 pages of Anna Karenina. And my version, I think, was better because my version had more jokes in it than Tolstoy's. So I gave up and I went on teaching literature here, there, and everywhere, and all the time not being able to believe that I was not going to be able to do it. And every time I tried to write, to be a great novelist, I failed. And then what happened was I found myself teaching at an institution I thought was demeaning to me, shame again, ignominy again, in a town in England that I thought was demeaning to me again in the Midlands. And I thought my life was just really horrible, but also ridiculous. So I wrote, instead of writing Crime and Punishment or War and Peace, I wrote a satiric novel, what was then called a campus novel. I'd never wanted to write a campus novel, never been my ambition to write a campus novel, but the only way, I kind of wrote myself out of desperation, really. I was in my late 30s. I'd published one work, which was a book on Shakespeare, with somebody else, so I'd written half a book. I'm nearly 40, and I've written half a book after all those years of dreaming of being a writer. So I finally, out of desperation, just sat down and wrote and wrote and wrote every day for about 2 years about how horrible my life was, how ridiculous my life was, and it was a satiric novel, which was finished. It got published. It meant I had to leave the institution I was teaching at because I was so rude about everybody I could not go on living there. And then that was it. I was just turfed into the world and had to earn a living then as a novelist, and had to tolerate people calling me a comic novelist, which I hate, being called a comic novelist. I can call myself a comic novelist because I know what comic novelist means. But when other people call me a comic novelist, I feel they don't know what it means. Because sometimes people would say, well, you know, this novel's very funny, but it's also serious. And I want to kill them. It's not funny and also serious. Yes. It's serious because it's funny. Absolutely. Because unless you're funny in some way, you're never really going to be serious. We can say this, can't we? Yes. All the great writers are funny.
Yes.
They might not be comic novelists, but all the great writers are funny. Perhaps Tolstoy less than most, but Dostoevsky is certainly funny. You have to be, comedy is a human resource. Yes. You cannot survive without comedy, and therefore you cannot write about humanity without the resource we know as comedy. So I never wanted, I don't know how you feel about it, but do you get called a comic novelist? You're funny?
I try to be, no one has said it so far, and so I find myself becoming ever more serious. But
I hope you're not getting too serious too soon. You want to let the seriousness creep up on you. You look at that screen, I'm going to give him some writer-to-writer advice.
Actually, I found, speaking of laughter, I found the day I realized I felt like I became a writer was when I learned how to laugh at myself. And in a way, that is one of the great resources of the novel, isn't it? It shows people learning how to look into themselves and laugh.
Yes, it's very important. You dare not take yourself, for a novelist to take himself seriously is a terrible thing. We all know several very famous writers. What happens is they win an award, they win a big award when they're young. The worst thing that can happen to you is to do well when you're too young. I hope you weren't too young when you did well at the beginning, because it's dangerous. Because you can burn yourself out. Either you burn yourself out or you take yourself too seriously. You must never believe those people who say you are a terrific writer. You must know in your soul you're a terrific writer, but you must know on your own terms why you're a terrific writer. Only you can know why you're a terrific writer. So that's a real danger. It took me a long time to realize that, because I used to be so envious of novelists who seemed to me began well and did all the right things and were well connected, and particularly novelists who had fathers who had novelists. I was so envious of people who had, you'd say to them, what does your father do? Oh, of course, I know your father is the eminent novelist so-and-so. And he'd say, what does your father do? And I have to say, he does tricks in a Chinese restaurant. Not knowing that, in fact, I was very lucky to have a father who did tricks in a father. Better to have a father who does tricks in a Chinese restaurant if you're a novelist than to have a novelist who's a father.
Absolutely. Before we take questions from the audience, I just wanted to ask you one last question about the actual act of writing and what it means to you. Not the final published work. What would it be like for you if tomorrow someone were to say to you, you can't sit at your desk anymore and write?
I don't know what I'd do, because the act of writing is very important to me. It's the only way I feel a bit loose. I feel as if I'm adrift in the world. I have to have two things. I have to be careful. I have to be married to somebody who wants to be married to me. I have been married a few times to women who don't want to be married to me. And that's not great. It gives you good characters, but that's not great. So to be married to someone who, I mean, I can recommend this now as a marriage guidance counselor. If you had to choose between being married to someone who doesn't want to be married to you and someone who does want to be married to you, this might seem obvious, but choose the person who wants to be married to you. And if you can want to be married to her or him too, this is perfect. So I have, fortunately now, at my old age, I kind of have that, so that's all right. And then writing, because otherwise I just feel I'm floating free. Writing actually earths me to being at my desk, it earths me to the world, really. And because writing too is the perfect escape from you. I've never written to find myself. I may have said this earlier. I don't want to find myself. I know myself. I want to find the someone who is not me, not the ordinary, boring, judgmental me who thinks this and who thinks that. When you write, the wonderful thing about why everybody should write, really, when you write, you discover, you make contact with a you that you didn't know was there. I don't necessarily mean a more generous you or a more humane you. I just mean a you that's not the ordinary, boring, everyday, judgmental you that votes and has opinions about political parties and Brexit and all that tedious stuff. The you that's not you. And that should happen. That's the wonderful thing about reading too, isn't it? When you're really reading a book that works, the books that really, really get to you are not the ones that go, yeah, that's what I'm like. They're something else. You just feel... It's not that you heroize people you might not heroize. It's just that you find that you're capable of feeling. Your feeling centers are not familiar to you. You are out there thinking things and, you're feeling, I suppose, really. You're feeling in a way that you're not used to feeling. And it's to do with language. This is all to do with language, because writing is, when people say to me, oh, this is a really wonderful, or I see a review that says this is a great book and it has a marvelous use of language, I want to die. Of course it's got a marvelous use of language. It only has language. It exists in language. What's a writer that doesn't have a wonderful use of language? There is only language. And language is the most wonderful thing because it connects you to now, it connects you to the past. When you're using words, when we use words, we're using the word Shakespeare used. It's how close can you be to that? We are inhabiting a similar medium to Shakespeare's medium. And at that moment that we're using words, Shakespeare, reading words, but even more writing words, Shakespeare moves through our soul. And that's a terrific thing to feel.
Wonderful. That's it for me. Let's have some questions from the audience. What about you, ma'am? Howard, if there's any particular people you want to pick out, please do. I'd hate to come in your way.
People who didn't look at him and looked at the screen, I guess. So it's a wonderful novel. I wanted to thank you for this beautiful book. I want to go back and read it all over again. Beryl reminds me of my 88-year-old mother. And I think her outrage at the politics of India is keeping her alive now. She is outraged every day. She's angry when she watches the news. But ultimately, I felt it was a book about hope. And did you set out to write something which was hopeful, or it just happened along the way that this book was about hope of all of us growing older and finding meaning at some point?
Thank you for that, and thank you, and I like the sound of your mother, who is angry all the time. I'm sure you're right, that angry is a great sustaining force. That's terrific. No, I didn't. When I write, I don't set out, really, to do anything. I just want to see where it will go. I think sometimes you do feel when you're writing, I'm allowing a mood of either despondency or hope to overtake, because both are false. But I think it was, if I'm right in saying that Beryl got there, Beryl, my heroine, got there on her own. I don't know where she came from. I'm not in charge of her. She was the one. She would laugh at the idea of hope. She would scorn the idea of hope, because everything she's ever done points against hope. But she has hope in that she meets this man who she really likes because he's not like any other man she's met, because he doesn't like himself as a man. For the first time, she doesn't have to attack a man for being stupid about his maleness. He hates his maleness. So she thinks she doesn't have to do any work on him. He's done the work on himself. It's almost as if she can save him. He's a finished man, she can save him. So she discovers a kind of hope in that. So yes, but I would never set out to write a hopeful novel. I'd make a mess of it if I did. Thank you for that question. There's somebody right there at the back.
Thank you. So you have included many racially and sexually stereotypical words and scenes in your book. And so on top of them, how do you ensure that your book helps to solve the issue of discrimination instead of deepening it, as I imagine that it is hard to have it both ways?
Can you help? Did you hear that question? I didn't quite get it.
Could you please repeat your question again?
Yes.
Okay.
So,
I'm not 90, but the hearing's not good.
So in your book, you have included many racially and sexually controversial words and scenes. So on top of them, how do you ensure that your book helps to solve the issue of discrimination instead of deepening it, as I imagine that it will be hard to have it both ways?
Helps to solve the issue of what?
Of discrimination.
Discrimination.
Discrimination. This is a hard one. I think if I wrote a novel that kind of wanted to do something about discrimination, it would not be very good. I don't want to deepen discrimination, but I don't want to save us from discrimination. I don't think that's really quite a novel. I think a novel goes about it in another way. What a novel does is a novel opens the imagination. And if you have an imagination, if your imagination is open to the world, you will not discriminate. So it's another way of coming at this. I remember a few years ago I wrote a novel about the Merchant of Venice, and it was called Shylock Is My Name. And people said, well, is it an anti-Semitic play? And my argument always was, if you are Shakespeare, you could not be anti-Semitic. It's not possible. Not because he didn't have all sorts of things about Jews that he'd inherited from other people that many of the thoughts he had about Jews were not flattering to Jews, but his imagination just opened to the human being. So Shylock in Shakespeare is a human being. And once you've acknowledged you can't discriminate against somebody really once you know them as a human being. Our problem with one another is that, well, there you are. And that's what the writer does. The writer makes you see the human being, the specific in the general. And that is the greatest solvent of discrimination that there can be.
Beautiful. Who's next? You there, in the blue cap? Yes.
Yes, thank you. So the protagonist, as we can see, is often very sarcastic and quite blunt, if I'm honest. So how did you deal with the conflict of trying to create a likable character and presenting her for her true self?
I never thought about writing a likable character. I didn't want to write a likable character. I don't want you to like her. I just want you to feel who she is. And that's much better than liking people. I don't want you to like me. I want you to, if we were to go out now and have a conversation in the sun in the garden, we could have a good conversation, an interesting conversation, without liking each other. I don't mean we have to detest each other, but you don't have to, I don't think you should like characters in literature. Sometimes you do, it happens that you do, but it's not an obligation. And sometimes you go, I've occasionally gone to reading groups. I made the mistake of going to a reading group where people are reading one of my novels. Why I do that, I don't know. It's because I'm looking for shame, humiliation, and ignominy. And then I'll hear somebody go, yeah, I didn't like anybody in it. And they think that's a criticism. So bloody what? What's so likable about Mr. and Mrs. Macbeth? You wouldn't want Antony and Cleopatra for dinner. You wouldn't want them as dinner guests. The great characters in literature we don't like. We just feel them, we see them, even simple things like seeing and hearing. I think was it George Eliot or Conrad who says, all I want to do is make you see and hear. Just see and hear. That's the person. That's what the person looks like. That's what the person sounds like. Likeable. Yeah.
Who's next?
Gentleman
Yes.
over here.
We have a mic for him? Yes. This is warming up to a very good conversation. We should have had another half an hour. Next time you come, ask them to give you 1.5 hours.
I thought they were giving me 4 hours.
Hi, my name is Mandar. My question is, when you try to portray forgetting in your writing, in any writing for that matter, I feel that you more or less end up portraying the failure of forgetting or the lack of forgetting, because for a writer, the device to forgetting is remembering, isn't it? So even when you read Kundera's The Book of Laughter and Forgetting, where he's trying to burn those photographs of his ex-girlfriend, you can't help but wonder if he's really helping anyone forget anything. So how do you portray forgetting?
Well, it's hard forgetting, but the one thing you don't want to do is do the comedy of somebody losing words. But it is true, I don't want to minimize forgetting. When forgetting is really serious, when it really has become an illness, well then that's just tragic. But certainly along the way there is forgetting that I've been forgetting for a long, long time. I do not remember anybody's name. You've just told me your name, it's gone, it's forgotten. I do not remember. And it's as if, and it took me a while to realize my mind is deliberately forgetting because it wants to put something else in that space. No disrespect to your name, but my brain's got other things it wants to do with that space. If I had to remember all your names, that would be it, I'd have had it. So there are kind of compensations to forgetting. And the compensation that Beryl has to forgetting, A, is you watch her becoming bad-tempered with herself, which is funny, and trying to find alternative words, which is funny, but also she's keeping alive the memory of her life in diaries. The bit of a diary you wanted me to read, and I was rude enough not to read. So she writes the most terrific diaries. I don't know what else to say, really, but as far as the problem of writing it was concerned, I did wonder about that, and I thought I'm not going to have too much comedy with her losing words. The exasperation of losing words, the way in which the mind, the imagination, will find alternatives to that, and then the fact that she wants to tell her story. The telling of your story, I've found that many people who, I know people, my mother-in-law who died not long ago, and my own mother who's still alive but is 97, I've forgotten how old. They tell a story of their life. The need to retell the story of your life differently each time. And if that's one of the consolations, I kind of like that. I like the fact that when old people tell you their story, they tell it you slightly different each time, as if the little bit occurs or they make something up, or the imagination moves into the space that the memory vacates.
Beautiful. You, ma'am. Agree.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm Dr. Kiran Chadda, and I like your sarcasm. And you said
I've just
that
forgotten your name.
It's okay. It's okay. They say in medical terms, if you forget 4 things in a day, it's okay. So I forgive you for that. But nevertheless, you draw inspirations from real characters, as you said. So did you draw some inspiration for the characterization of this lady from your mother, who's 97?
No.
Surprising?
No. It's funny how you use real people. I don't like really using I don't kind of using as a funny word. It's not how it happens. I think you sometimes might start from an idea of something that somebody says, and then you expand and change and think. So I never feel when people say, oh, that I recognize myself in your novel, you've not done justice to me. I say, well, you're not in my novel. I'm sorry to tell you, you are not in my novel. And so my doing justice to you or not is neither here nor there. I might not have done justice to the only thing a writer cannot do justice to is his own imagination. In the end, there is no real person behind a novel. In the truest sense of a novel, there is no real person there. I honestly don't know where Beryl came from. I honestly don't know. But I've lived a long time, and I assume as I wrote about her that what was coming out in my creating her, insofar as she didn't create herself, but that would be magic. So it feels as though she created herself, but that's not magic. So there is no such thing as magic, so that could not be. But the sensation of her creating herself is to do with the fact that my hands were not all over, as it were. I'm not going, you're going to say this, you're going to do that. But what she's like and where she comes from is, I suppose, my accumulated conversations with women. But what I particularly liked about Beryl was the way she talks about men. And I kind of hoped as I was writing it, I thought, I know what I now, because you don't always know what your novel is about. Then halfway through you go, this is what my novel is about. And halfway through I thought, this is what my novel is about. This is a study of the uselessness of men as viewed by very, very clever, sarcastic women. Men throughout the 20th century. So her diaries are all diaries about men. Husbands that she's had, lovers that she's had, and they are all useless. All of them useless. And what feeds that are the many ways in which, I suppose, among the things that feed that, are the many ways that women have told me I'm useless. Have we got time?
We don't have time for any more, I'm sorry to say, but you can all catch up with Howard at the author signing tent and sign all your Jacobsons. But just before we finish, I want to say thank you very much, Howard. And within an hour, you've kind of showed us what novels are for what writing is for, and what a literary festival is for. Thank you so much.
We wish to thank Howard Jacobson and Chandrahas Choudhury, along with the Tribune, for this very enriching and gripping session. Do note that the authors, both of them, will be available to sign their books at the book signing desk. It's located right at the entrance of Char, Bagh, so you could maybe go and wait for your authors there. The festival brochure and flyer with the full program are available for purchase. Are available for purchase at the JCB Prize for Literature bookshop managed by Full Circle. You can also grab a copy of your favorite book while you're there. Please help us in keeping the venue clean and dispose any waste items in the bins placed all across the Palace. Please tweet using hashtag JaipurLitFest 2020 or tag @ZJaipurLitFest. The next session at Char Bagh is session number 45, Celestial Bodies, and would begin shortly. Kindly note that the festival venues are in the no smoking zone, and we request you not to smoke in the public spaces. You may, however, smoke in the designated areas. Also note that tickets for the music stage held between 23rd and 25th, that is today and tomorrow, at Clark's 6:30 onwards, would be available as well.